So glad to be here with you today and read our passage. It comes from Luke 17:11 through 19. Jesus cleansed the 10 lepers. On the way to Jerusalem, he was passing along between Samaria and Galilee. And as he entered a village, he was met by 10 lepers who stood at a distance and lifted up their voices, saying, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." When he saw them, he said to them, "Go and show yourself to the priests." And as they went, they were cleansed. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice, and he fell on his face at Jesus' feet, giving him thanks. Now he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus answered, "Were not 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?" And he said to him, "Rise and go your way. Your faith has made you well." Have a great Sunday.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Nick. I am the youth pastor, and that is my standard introduction. So we're done. Okay. I love Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is coming up, and it's fantastic. It's wonderful for so many reasons. Let's see. I love the food. That's obvious. I love the weather. It's getting cold outside, which makes me happy because I'm well insulated, and summer just doesn't do well with this body. I love the dark clothing for the same reason. It's slimming. I love the Thanksgiving episodes of Friends. Those are the best ones. We have this weird tradition in our family where we play all of them throughout the day. We just skip to each Thanksgiving episode of Friends, and it's life-giving. Let's see. I tolerate the parade and the football because it usually gets me out of doing other stuff. So I don't even know if my wife is in here. She probably can't hear me, which is good. So I usually watch it just so I don't have to do stuff and help. But I pretend that I love it. So, yeah, I don't think she heard me. My favorite Thanksgiving, I think, and I thought through this a lot because there were a lot of good ones. My favorite Thanksgiving, my dad was in the Air Force, so we lived overseas, and there was one year where my parents decided to invite a dozen or so young enlisted military guys over to the house for Thanksgiving. There were a lot of them in the area that year that just didn't have anywhere to go, and so they invited them over, and it was pretty fun. You know, these were young, like 19, 20-year-old guys that had just joined the military, and so there was a lot of, like, wrestling with each other, sneaking beers and other drinks in the spare room where my parents couldn't see because that was the one stipulation they made. We're not a drinking household. Well, they made it one anyway. They were using really interesting, colorful language that as a 13-year-old I found very appealing. And I remember watching these guys and just thinking to myself, is this what it's like to be an adult? Because it looks awesome. But I think, you know, the part that really stuck out to me about that day was it was for a 13-year-old to be moved by something is difficult to do, I think, sometimes. We were around the table, and there were like 14 guys that I'd never met before that I'd seen doing really weird stuff that day. And each of them took a moment to really, because, you know, my parents would do the "what are you thankful for" thing. And they each took a moment to really express some gratitude, not just to my parents, but to talking about how they missed their own families. And I think a couple of them cried. It might have been the couple that had more of the special drinks than the others. But it was a really moving moment for me, and it was very memorable to see these guys being so thankful and grateful and vulnerable. And if I'm being really honest, though, that's that moment of the day that I didn't really like growing up. The standing in a circle, going around saying, "What are you thankful for? What are you thankful for?" You see, the thing is, I have no problem saying thank you about stuff. I have no problem being grateful, but I've learned something about myself recently, and it's this whole Enneagram thing. I'm an Enneagram 4, which means one of my problems is I don't like being told what to do. I especially didn't like it when I was 13, and there was something about the forced "tell me what you're thankful for" thing that just it didn't feel real to me. It felt sort of empty. And so I would always try to come up with something better than "I'm thankful that the gravy is thicker this year than last year," or "I'm thankful that Aunt Ruth brought green beans instead of green bean casserole, which is disgusting." I would try to come up with real stuff, but it just, I don't know, it never felt very real. And that kind of feeds into how I parent as well now. Like, I don't like telling my kids to say thank you to stuff, but when I watch somebody do something for them and then they just look at them and run to the other room, it bothers me. So I'm forced to do something which I don't really like, which is tell my kids to say thank you, even though I know it's basically meaningless and they don't really mean it because if they meant it, they would have said it. but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to do it because it's the right thing to do. Even though I don't like it, I'm going to do it. And I'm going to continue to hope and pray for the day that they will just spontaneously say thank you when someone gives them something that they didn't deserve. And honestly, I don't know, I get weird about thank yous. I get weird about thank yous just in general life. Like, I think sometimes we say it a little bit too much, and we say it at the wrong times. Like, for example, you're out to eat and you're finished and you say to the waitress, thank you, and they say, thank you. And I'm like, why? I didn't do anything for you. It's not like I picked this particular restaurant because I knew you were working here and I wanted to bless you with my presence. I just wanted to eat chicken fried steak and you were the closest place to it. Don't say, it's okay to say you're welcome. It's okay. The waitress can say you're welcome. I think we get this idea that saying you're welcome has this like entitlement attached to it, like you're welcome, which really is okay to say. It's just fine. I'll even catch myself doing it. I'll hold the door open. I did this just the other day, and it wasn't even on purpose to prove my point. I opened the door for somebody, and they said thank you, and I said thank you. I don't know why I did that. It makes no sense. It's like when you get on a plane and they say have a good flight, and you say you too. It just doesn't make any sense. It makes no sense. I've done that many times. In fact, I think the weirdest place for someone to say thank you is on the plane. Like, when you're leaving, the stewardess will say thank you, fine, it's whatever. But if the pilot actually comes out and starts saying thank you to me, I just want to stop him and say, dude, I didn't do anything for you. It's because of you that I didn't have to drive all the way to Florida. Thank you. It's because of you that I'm not floating in the Gulf of Mexico right now. Thank you for not having that second cocktail this morning. It's because of you that I'm not floating in a pile of melting fuselage. Thank you. But they'll just keep saying it right back to me. It's okay to say, you're welcome. And as I was thinking about that, I realized, I don't think we have a problem with saying thank you. I think we know how to do it really well. We know how to say thank you. But the question that I want to dive into a little bit today using this text, I want to ask, do we have a thankful heart? We know how to say thank you, but do we have a thankful heart? So let's look at Luke 17, the healing of the 10 lepers. First, let's ask the question, what do we need to know about this passage? Well, let's start with leprosy. Raise your hand if you ever had leprosy before. Be honest, it's okay. We got one in the back. Good for you. Oh, maybe not. Good, but I'm glad you don't have it anymore, Chris. That's good. I'm happy for you. You've gotten over it. I hope you went and told the priest. Leprosy, as we know it, is this specific sort of skin disease that we think about where like things are falling off you and you're like wrapped in mummy cloths all the time. It's not exactly what the scripture was talking about. If you look at Leviticus 13, which I don't encourage you to do because it'll take up all of your time, it's about 59 verses that lists off all the various types of skin diseases that they put under the category of leprosy. They go into a lot of detail. So again, don't read it before you're about to eat or even right after. It gets kind of gross. But basically what it boils down to... Thank you. I can do better than that, but I chose not to. What it boils down to is, if you got it, stay away from people. That was basically the rule. If you come down with one of these various skin diseases that's obviously pretty contagious, they need you to go away from the community. And a lot of times what that meant was people that were diagnosed with these skin diseases, they sort of grouped up together. They ran in packs. They lived together. They worked together. They did whatever they could together because they couldn't be with anybody else. They could only be with each other. And so we look at this group of 10 lepers, and at least one of these guys was a Samaritan. And Jews and Samaritans would not normally live together, but misery tends to love company, and so all 10 were outcasts. Now, really quickly, in case you don't know or you never took a Bible course for any particular reason, Jews and Samaritans weren't buddies, right? Jews and Samaritans, let me give you just a brief description of why. So the kingdom of Israel split into two kingdoms, and eventually, because they continued to break covenant with God, those two kingdoms were taken out of Israel into captivity by Babylon and Assyria, some neighboring nations. Now, in the meantime, about 70 years, there was this group of people that still lingered behind, and they created their own community. They married the people around them, and they began to sort of create their own worship practices, thinking that this was their new normal. But then about 70 years after the captivity, they were taken out, about 42,000 of those Jews were let back in, and they tried to rebuild, and the people that were left there, what they now called the Samaritans, did not like that, and they fought about it. The Samaritans tried to sabotage the rebuilding of the walls and the temple, and so they didn't like each other. And that only got worse over the next 550 years or so. So the Jews and Samaritans, not friends. That's why Luke makes it a special point to say one of them was a Samaritan. So that's what happened. Now, why was Jesus even there? That's a good question. It says in verse 11 that he was on his way to Jerusalem, where he will be arrested after less than a week. He'll be crucified and resurrected all in the span of that week. And this story starts a new section in Luke where he's traveling to Jerusalem, where Luke is explaining all the things that he did and the people he met and the stories he told while he was on his way to Jerusalem. And this is the beginning of that section, and that section ends with the meeting of a man named Zacchaeus, who, let me check my notes, yes, was in fact a wee little man. So what actually happens in this story? Well, we saw Kara read it, and it was very nicely read. 10 guys heard Jesus was coming to town, so they waited on the road for him to show up. They had heard of him, obviously, so they knew he could do something for them. But they didn't specifically ask to be healed. They didn't say, Lord Jesus, please heal us. They said very specifically, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. So let's talk about Master for just a quick second. Luke is actually the only one that uses this term to refer to Jesus. Other writers might use the word rabbi or teacher or Lord. Luke uses the word master. And this word, I don't know, it's probably similar to how we use it. It's sort of an implied authority that they give to this person. That they're saying to him, you are clearly in authority over not just me, but the people around us. And there's a sort of implied willingness to obey by saying that. So it would almost be like us saying, Jesus, Master, whatever you tell me to do, I'll do it. Have mercy on us. So there's sort of this implied phrasing of, I will obey whatever you tell me to do, just by saying, Master. So Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. So in response to this, Jesus, in a very quick, unceremonious way, just says, go and show yourselves to the priests. That's a weird way to heal somebody. That is not typical of how Jesus interacted with people. It's very short. It's not very, I don't know, religious. It's just sort of extremely matter of fact, because that's what they had to do, right? If a leper became better, if their skin disease cleared up and they were no longer troubled by this particular affliction, they had to go and show themselves to the priest, present themselves and say, look, I'm all better. And they had to offer a particular sacrifice. And then the priest would say, okay, you're all good. Go back and live among the community. You're fine now. So instead of Jesus saying you're healed or you're going to be made better, he just says, go and show yourselves to the priests. Isn't it true that sometimes we wish that God would do things for us the way we want them to be done? I think that's a very obvious statement. Like when we ask for wisdom or strength or whatever it is we're asking for, instead of God just opening our brain and implanting those traits into us, he often puts us through difficult circumstances that require us to lean on him in order to gain those traits. But wouldn't it be great if he could just do it, like immediately, the way I want to do it? Just give me the stuff that I'm praying for. Why can't you do that for me? I'm not, this is how I feel often when I'm praying and I don't immediately receive these things. It frustrates me. And the way that Jesus healed these guys is not how I would want to be healed. If I were them, I would obviously and most certainly be complaining on the way, like, he didn't even cry over me like he did with Lazarus. That's kind of lame. He didn't even mix any mud and spit together and put it on my skin. That would have been pretty cool. That would have been nice. I guess I'm not as important as those other guys. I don't know. He didn't even ask me my name. He didn't even touch me. These are the things that I would be thinking. If this is how Jesus chose to heal me, I would complain. And we don't really get to see much of how these guys respond to the healing. We only get to see the one, but I don't know. I imagine that if you're moving towards the priest and all of a sudden you find yourself healed, the thing that pops into my mind, and I don't know if you've all seen this movie, but the movie That Thing You Do, where Tom Hanks is a record producer and he gets this little band of guys and he gets their music out. There's this scene where they hear themselves on the radio for the first time, and it keeps cutting back to each one of them like running through the streets, yelling and screaming, and they're dancing and they're jumping up and down, and they're just full of joy and excitement, and they just can't stop, and they're like kissing cardboard cutouts of things and just jumping and dancing all around, making complete fools of themselves. I get this sense maybe that you're on your way to the priest, and all of a sudden your stuff is cleared up. You don't have these weird boils on your skin. You don't have these weird lesions, and you're no longer itching. And you realize, oh my gosh, I'm going to have my life back. Oh my gosh, I'm going to be able to be among people again. I'm going to see my family. I'm going to get to see my friends. And they're probably jumping and excited and really, really into it. And they burst into the temple and they're like, hey, we're all healed now. Everything's good. And the priest says, okay, you guys are fine. And they're like jumping around and dancing with each other, and they run back to their homes and their families, and all the while they forgot to go back. And I think we read this story and we think, man, how could they do that? But let's be honest, you would too. You would have done the same thing. You've been separated from your family, your community, your friends for years, and then all of a sudden you've got this golden ticket. You're free. You get to go back. The reality is, no, you're probably not going to turn around and go thank the guy immediately. You're probably going to make a mental note like, hey, I need to find that guy and say thank you because this is really cool. But you're going to go home. You're going to go see your friends. You're going to go see your family. You're going to go hug your kids for the first time, and God only knows how long. That's what you're going to do. I mean, it's like expecting kids coming down the stairs at Christmas morning to see the gifts and immediately run and turn and hug their mom and dad and say thank you. That's not going to happen. We know that. But in this moment, there was one. There was one. There was one who, as he noticed that his healing was complete and he was cleansed and that he was going to have his life back, there was one who turned around from the crowd and came back before he went and saw the priest. Now, maybe he didn't have any family. Maybe he didn't have, who knows, whatever the reason. It doesn't matter. The point is, he turned back. And he got so caught up in the moment that he forgot to go see the priest. And I don't know, he was a Samaritan after all. Maybe the priest wouldn't have seen him. Who knows? Whatever his motivation, he came back, and he came back pretty big. It says in the text that he came back praising God with a loud voice, giving thanks, falling on his face at Jesus' feet. And Jesus makes a point to say in front of this man and his disciples and whoever else might have been following along, he says, where are the rest? Is it only the Samaritan that came back? Did I not heal 10 of you? And it's quiet. There's no answer. I think the disciples at this point knew when Jesus was asking a rhetorical question. And so Jesus tells this man to get up, to go back on your way. Your faith has made you well. He didn't say, because you came back, you're made well. He didn't say, because you said thank you or because you've been a good person. He just said, because of your faith has made you well. Their faith that this master could heal them made them well. This one guy who came back, he knew something that the others didn't know quite yet. This one guy was the kid who ran to the parents on Christmas morning. This one guy had a thankful heart. You see, he knew that God's gifts are good, but the giver of those gifts is far better. You see, why do we need to know this story? Why is this story important? Well, I think something we need to understand really quickly from this text is that their healing, all 10 of them were healed. It wasn't that all 10 of them were healed and then they went and the only one came back and so he unhealed the other 9. That's not what happened. All 10 of them remained healed and one of them came back. Our salvation is not dependent on our gratitude, but a lack of gratitude does not lead us closer to Jesus. James 1:17, James, the brother of Jesus, writes in his book, he says, every good and perfect gift comes from above. So if we take an inventory of the good things in our lives, if we look at what God has truly blessed us with, I think we can all come up with a good list. Now, some may have a larger list than others. That doesn't matter. We all have some. And you did not give yourself those things. No amount of bootstrap pulling has brought about the good and wonderful things in your life. They have come from God, the giver of good gifts. And when we take credit for the gifts that God has given us, we move further away from him. We begin to forget who he is and what he has done for us. We begin to cherish the gifts more than the giver. And we can look at Romans 1:21 and 22. Paul writes this. He says, "For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him. But they became futile in their thinking. Their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things." You see, Paul is talking here to believers and non-believers. And right before he makes this point, he explains how within the very fibers of this world, within the very rhythms of the world, there exists proof of who God is and his love for us. There is no one who has excuse to say, well, I never had a chance to know him. Paul makes it clear, yes, you did. And in these verses, we can see clearly what Paul is saying happens to those of us who begin to place our worshipful efforts on the gifts rather than the giver. Their hearts become dark and they are pulled further away from Christ. That it makes it harder for them to know who he is. They exchange foolishness for wisdom. And make it clear, when I say they, I mean me and I mean we. A thankful heart brings us closer to God, but an unthankful heart leads us away. In Exodus 32, we see the story, sort of a culmination point of this story of Moses being called by God to go and rescue the people of Israel from Egypt. And he goes and he gets them and they leave without having to fight or pick up a weapon. And he leads them to this Red Sea that needs to be parted. They're not going to be able to get across. And the water parts. They walk over on dry land, not even with muddy feet. And then they get there and they're hungry. And so God just blankets the land with food that they can use and prepare, and he gives them quail to eat. And he takes water out of rocks at verbal command. He provides for them every single day in miraculous ways over and over and over again. And yet in Exodus 32, we see this story. It says, when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, you see Moses had been called up to this mountain to receive the covenant that God was going to make with his people, to receive the law that they needed to know how to live under God's law. So when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down, the people gathered themselves together to Aaron and said to him, Aaron was Moses' brother, he was the priest, and it said, "Make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what has become of him." So Moses is on the mountain. He's receiving the revelation that they need to know how to live in relationship with God, and they can't or they won't wait. And they decide it would be better to worship the things that God has given them rather than the God who gave them to them. They decide that it would make more sense to do what was in their instincts to do. They'd been living among a people that did this all the time. They were living among a people that if the harvest didn't come, they would build a particular god to worship for that harvest, hoping that the harvest would come. They believed and they lived among people who, if you couldn't have a baby, you worshiped something that would help you get a baby. They lived among people and they developed these instincts that told them, if you're not getting what you want, worship the things that you want. And so they did. They chose not to wait because waiting is hard. Waiting is difficult. They forgot that God's gifts are good, but the giver of those gifts is worth waiting for. So, okay. I've given us a lot of examples. I've given us a lot of, decent points, I think, of maybe we need to develop this thankful heart. So the question is, how are we supposed to actually do that? There's no button that we press that says thankful heart, please. There's no way to order it. There's no way to just pray for it and God just implants it into our mind. We have to do something. We have to develop a thankful heart. So how are we supposed to do this? Well, let's look at our guy in Luke 17. Let's see what he did. Let's see what makes him special. First, if we look at this text, I think it's clear to see that a thankful heart requires faith. Faith that our God will answer our prayers in his own way, not in ours. Matthew Henry, a commentary writer, says, "Those that expect Christ's favors must take them in his way and method." You see, faith like this impels us to obey before we see the full evidence of God's work within us. Faith is stepping out of the boat when Jesus says, "Come and meet me." Faith is putting the nets on the other side when the master tells us to. Faith is laying those nets down and following him when he asks us to. Faith is waiting for Moses to come down from the mountain. Faith is refusing to make that shady business deal, even though it would be really good for you and your family, and all your colleagues are encouraging you to just go ahead and do it. Faith is keeping your eyes on your own test, even though your super smart friend is sitting right next to you and you didn't have time to study. Faith is obeying God even when it makes better sense to follow our instincts. You see, a thankful heart requires that kind of faith. And a thankful heart also requires us to wait. See, these men waited for God's mercy. They knew he could give them what he wanted, and so they respectfully waited for him to come. They didn't charge up to him as soon as they saw him. They didn't go up to him and say, "Please, God, please make us healed. Please make us healed." They didn't rush him. They waited. They didn't even ask specifically for healing. They asked for what they knew they needed, God's mercy. You see, Israel couldn't wait for God's timing on the mountain. They did what made sense at the time. They wouldn't wait. And when we forget to wait, we miss out on the much better gifts that come from waiting. The 9 who didn't come back, they missed out on more time with Jesus. They missed out on those things that I would have complained about on the way. They missed out on that one-on-one intimate time that they could have had if they'd gone back and given thanks as the one did. They missed out on that because they chose not to wait. God's timing is far, far better than our own. And when we pray for immediate action and we don't get it, it can be very frustrating. David writes in Psalm 13, 1-2, he says, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I counsel in my own soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me?" It's frustrating when God doesn't give us what we want when we think we need it. But even David knows at the end of this psalm in 13:5 and 6, he says, "But I have trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me." So a faithful heart has faith to obey even when it makes no sense. A faithful heart waits for the Lord to deliver when it is his time to deliver. And lastly, a thankful heart turns from the crowd and returns to the giver. The other 9 went and followed the law. They made the appropriate sacrifices and returned to their friends and families, a completely logical and normal thing to do. It would have been very logical for this man who turned around to actually just go ahead and do that, to follow with the crowd and go see his friends and family, to go do the priestly sacrifice, to do what Jesus told him to do. It would make a lot of sense to go and do that. But there was something that pulled him away from the crowd that says, "No, I have to go see him. No, I can't do what I have to return to the giver." Something pulled him back. And he had to go to the Lord with his sacrifice of praise. Psalm 107, again, 20-22 says, he sent out, and this was hundreds of years before, he sent out his word and healed them and delivered them from their destruction. Let them thank the Lord for his steadfast love, for his wondrous works to the children of man, and let them offer sacrifices of thanksgiving and tell of his deeds in songs of joy. I don't know if this one man had this psalm ringing in his heart for some reason, but this is exactly what he did. And this pleased the Lord more than all the sacrifices that the other men offered, even though they were obeying the law. Instead of going to the priest, this Samaritan became a priest in a sense and came and built his altar at the feet of Jesus. The crowd said, "Let's do what makes sense." The Samaritan said, "This gift is good, but the giver is better." He had faith. He waited. And in the end, he turned from the crowd and went back to the giver of his gifts. He had a thankful heart. And the question I want to ask myself in us today is, do we have the thankful heart? This is an important thing to think about at Thanksgiving, because Thanksgiving is a time, I think, sure, it's to celebrate the relationship we had with the Native Americans, but also it is good because we need to remember to come back to the Lord. We are called to come back because he is the giver of good things. And my friends, I know I am. We are surrounded by good and wonderful gifts from God. We survive off of them both physically and spiritually. But do we turn from the crowd and fall at the feet of Jesus and shout praises and cries of thanksgiving as this man did? Or are we content to just enjoy his gifts and occasionally say thank you? Do we have a thankful heart? Maybe a better question, why do we need a thankful heart? Why do we need this? Sounds nice. It's a little cliche sounding, to be honest, but why do we need this? I believe a thankful heart leads to abundance, and an unthankful heart leads to lack. I think an unthankful heart leads to darkness, and a thankful heart puts us back on that right track. And a thankful heart leads us to life, and an unthankful heart leaves us open to attack. And I think an unthankful heart takes us away from Jesus, while a thankful heart leads us back. Jesus healed those 10 men, not just the one who returned. He didn't take back his healing because they weren't thankful. He doesn't take back his gifts from us because we don't have a thankful heart. But who would you rather be? In your heart, who would you prefer to follow? The crowd of the 9 or the one who came back? For me, and this is a long walk for me, I want to be like that man. I know that I'm not. I know that there is a disconnect between what I want and what I would do. And as I was preparing this and looking over these things and reading these stories and these commentaries, I was legitimately very convicted of the fact that I am preaching to you something that I do not have down. I am not there. But boy, do I really want to be. I am too obsessed with the gifts that God gives me. I often find myself putting them before him. And I don't want to do that anymore. I want to move past from being thankful to having a thankful heart, to having the kind of heart that draws me away from the very gifts that I love to the giver of those gifts. And I'm sorry because I don't have a step-by-step plan for how to get there, because I'm just not there yet. And they tell you don't preach things you don't know how to do, but I'm sorry, I can't help it. I want this kind of heart. And I'm going to begin the process. And it's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen next week. But I firmly believe, and I tell this to the students all the time, I firmly believe that if I pray for the things God has told me to be, that he will put me in situations that force me to rely on him to get them. So my encouragement to you is, you may not have a thankful heart. That's okay. You can have one. It is possible to not just be a part of the 9, but to be in that group of 1. And my encouragement to you is, seek that kind of faith. Seek that kind of waiting spirit. Look for ways that you can turn from the crowd in order to develop that thankful heart. I will be doing the same. Let me pray for us as we close up.